Hi everyone. So today I wanted to do just kind of a casual talk about the Ottoman Navy in the early modern period. So I haven't talked a lot about the Ottoman Navy because most of my wargaming is on land. But been reading about it lately. It's pretty interesting. And I think it's a good, like with a lot of this stuff, good opportunities for wargaming. So the Ottomans are a pretty important naval power. Map here. So they control, and after about 1517, when they conquer the Mamluks, which I'll talk about in a second, they control obviously the Bosphorus, so that's the little gap between Istanbul or Constantinople at that time, Constantinia, and Asia, and the Dardanelles, which you guys know about World War I. That's Gallipoli, all that. So they take over Egypt and Syria from the Mamluks, who were another sultanate. I think I'll do another video on them at some point because it's really interesting state. But the Mamluks didn't really have a navy, and this is kind of questioned by a lot of historians I've been reading lately. They're not really sure why, but it just wasn't a priority. They didn't really have ambitions on expanding their territory, as far as we can tell. They wanted to basically keep Egypt and Syria kind of south of the Taurus Mountains, and then they were happy to have, at least until later, some minor Turkish principalities basically between them and the Ottomans as a buffer. And then they control the spice trade along the Red Sea, but they're not really big into having their own fleet. They basically partner with the Venetians, and that's their naval policy. Well, the Ottomans pursue totally different path. So starting under Bayezid II in the late 15th, early 16th century, they build they undergo a huge naval buildup, and if you know about history in general, sea power is very important to any kind of empire or state. And because you have countries like Venice, which is thankfully marked on here. Not a lot of land area, but they're really powerful because they control the shipping lanes basically and commerce. So the Ottomans quickly become the main rival of the Venetians, and then of course Habsburg Spain, and they compete over the eastern and western Mediterranean essentially for about 150 years, basically. More or less until 1700. And I have a Ottoman picture of some of their ships, so their galleys. And in terms of tactics, as far as I can tell, it hadn't really changed that much from antiquity. Obviously, the biggest change was the fact that you can have musketeers on board and you have cannons. But really, the Ottomans kind of used ramming and more or less tactics that wouldn't have been out of place in antiquity. So galley warfare, basically. And the Spanish Habsburgs and the Venetians used galleys too, so there's not really a big technological gap. And this picture is from an interesting episode when the Ottomans and the French have an alliance, and the Ottoman fleet winters at Toulon in the south of France. But anyway, I just wanted to have an Ottoman depiction, and those are the European ships on the right. Later on, the Ottomans will start to use some European-style, I don't know if capital ship would be the right term, but basically large sailing ship, galleon type thing. there's a lot of campaigns you can work in naval warfare for your wargaming with. So the map has a bunch of them. So you have Rhodes, which is captured by Sultan Suleiman in 1522, which is a big defeat for the Knights of St. John. Then you have the Siege of Malta, which is amphibious. So some of these amphibious kind of campaigns. And then you have later in the 16th century of the War for Cyprus, which is when Lepanto takes place, which I think this is supposed to be Lepanto. So big defeat for the Ottomans. Now they are able to rebuild all the ships, but the problem with Lepanto is that they lose a lot of veterans, a lot of veteran sailors, a lot of veteran Marines, people that they would have, needed. And the Ottomans themselves write about this. So this is a big problem. Now, traditionally, the interpretation is that, the Mediterranean is kind of not important after this. The Spanish shift to focusing on the Atlantic. I have a book that I was looking at. The title escapes me, but maybe I'll do a more in-depth review of it. But basically, the author's arguing that, no, that's not really the case. That obviously Lepanto was a shift, but the Spanish are still interested in the Eastern Mediterranean because, and they should be, and the Ottomans are too, because let's go back to my map here. So it's not on here, but the coastline of Syria and Palestine, I guess you could call it today, whatever, Aleppo, which is somewhere in here. Basically, this coastline is a big terminal point for a huge silk and luxury goods, essentially trade that comes from Iran or Persia, So this is hugely important, basically, until maybe the 18th century, when the Europeans really shift how world supply chains work. So this region remains important, and obviously they're going to fight over it. And of course, there's going to be plenty of Corsair activity all up and down North Africa, capturing slaves, capturing loot, all that stuff. So that's kind of the issue in the Eastern Mediterranean. And as you can see, of course, it remains a conflict zone because we have Crete, which is marked on the map, and there's a war for Crete in the 17th century. And then later, at the very end of the 17th century, which I don't know if it's on this map, but there's a siege of Candia, which I'm not sure is on here. But anyway, if you look up the siege of Candia, that was a long siege by Ottomans of this one particular Venetian fort, essentially. So, a lot of opportunities for wargaming ideas. I think Ottoman Navy, even by academics, not really well studied, unfortunately. But it could be an interesting idea for naval and land wargaming, to combine the two in kind of a campaign. So I think I'll just keep this one kind of short, 10 minutes. This is just kind of an introduction to the Ottoman Navy. Obviously, there's a huge amount of sources and well, they're in archives, but there's some books out there. There's probably a lot more sources, a lot of sources, I'm sure, in the archives. But in terms of books, like I said, it's not really super well studied, unfortunately. But this is just kind of an introduction, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you guys in the next video.